All right, let's go ahead and open our Bibles this evening to Esther chapter 5. Esther chapter 5, as we go through the life of Esther. Tonight we see Esther goes before the king. Now last week we learned just how important one person is. And God is about to use Esther to save the entire Jewish population from wicked Haman. Mordecai has told Esther to go before Ahasuerus to try to save their people, but Esther knows that this could cost her life. So she sends Mordecai word to get the Jews to fast, and she and her maidens will fast also. She decided to go before Ahasuerus regardless of the cost to her. In verse 16 of chapter 4, her words were, "If I perish, I perish." See, she believed in her cause, and it was worth risking her life for. And you know, I wonder how many Christians believe in the cause of Christ. Or I wonder how many of us believe that Jesus is worth dying for. I wonder how many of us would repeat the words of Esther, "I'm going to serve my Lord, and if I perish, I perish." But better yet, I wonder how many Christians today are willing to live for Christ, to give their full devotion to His cause. I've heard people say, "Well, I would die for Christ," but they don't live for Him. Which is easier? How many Christians are willing to give their full devotion for His cause? And I'm afraid the answer would be very few. I mean, it's evident by how easy it is for people to miss church for no good reason. And I'm always reminded of that commercial I've heard on Moody radio before, where the announcer comes on and he says, "Meet Bill." He's having, not Bill Vella, but he's having a hard time getting to church, and his alarm clock goes off, and he's like, "Oh man, I don't want to get up. I got to get dressed, and I got to go to church, and oh man," and he's just having a hard time getting to church. And then the announcer goes, "And now meet Yorick. He's also having a hard time getting to church." And then you hear somebody running through the bush and the grass, and you hear dogs in the background, and York goes, "Oh Lord, help me to get there." York's also having a hard time getting to church. That's American Christianity for you. We're so shallow. We just don't really put the Lord where He should be in our lives. See, God has a plan and a purpose for each and every one of us. But because of our non-commitment, our unwillingness to live or die for Him, His plan has to be carried out by someone else. And Esther was willing to die for the cause that she was called to do for such a time as this. C.S. Lewis once said something about the importance of being loyal to a cause that is greater than ourselves. And he likened that quality to a person's chest. He said, "What we need are people with chest." The old American word for that would be guts. We need people with guts who will say, "I will stand for this, and if I must die, then I will die." Rudyard Kipling, the author of the Jungle Book, wrote in his poem, "If," he wrote this: If you can keep your head when all about you are others losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but not too much, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. What Kipling is saying is, Be courageous. Stand alone, no matter the cost. One 12-year-old boy, many years ago, resigned from delivering the San Francisco Examiner, it's a newspaper, and in doing so, this 12-year-old boy wrote the following letter. Gentlemen, I am a carrier for the San Francisco Examiner. As provided in Section 14A of the Youth Carrier Delivery Contract, I am giving the newspaper agency a minimum of 30 days written notice prior to my resignation. Please note my resignation will go into effect Tuesday, and I'm quitting as a form of protest against the series you printed in early June entitled Gay in America and the very unprofessional and biased manner in which you reported on touchy subjects like gay liberation and abortion issues. I could not in good conscience comply with all the terms of my contract as stated in paragraph 3 and solicit a paper that I personally disagree with. Sincerely, signed. Let me ask you, would you have written a letter like that? Would you stand against an entire company that stands for what you stand against? Would you have had the guts to do what that 12-year-old paperboy did? When Mother Teresa spoke before an audience in sophisticated Washington, D.C. at the National Prayer Breakfast, she addressed a deep concern of hers, the abortion issue. And as our pro-abortion president at the time, Bill Clinton, sat behind her, she boldly announced, "Send me your babies." And again, it's her guts that we admire. Would you have had the guts standing there in front of the president to have said something like that? And that's why we admire Esther. She not only says that she will do something, she does it, knowing that if she, not knowing whether she will even live to see another sunrise. And let me say, no one is born prejudiced, and no one is born courageous. So let me ask you a couple of very personal questions. Do you teach your children to stand up for what they believe? Are you teaching your grandchildren to be people of character regardless? See, that's the way that they're going to learn. And let me ask you another question. Are you modeling that authentic character? And that is what leaves the message permanently etched in their minds. Are you modeling it? Words don't mean as much as your actions. You can talk a good talk, but if your walk doesn't jive with your talk, your kids see it. They know. So you see, Esther didn't come onto this earth with a sensitive conscience and a courageous heart. She learned it from her cousin, who became her mentor and adopted father, Mordecai. See, he knew how far he could stretch Esther with his challenge. And she rose to the challenge and said, "I'll do exactly what you've taught me to do." But remember what else she said? Again, look at verse 16 of chapter 4. "Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast you for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law." Now this implies that during this time of fasting, she would also be waiting on her Lord in prayer. And that's what fasting is all about, right? I mean, the Jews didn't stop eating to lose weight. No, they fasted for spiritual reasons. And when an issue of this importance became their concern, it was no time for fun and feasting. And things got pretty intense as they filled the time that they would normally spend preparing and eating food, and long drawn-out periods of prayer and fasting. So Esther challenged Mordecai to round up as many of God's people as he could find on the streets of Shushan and have them fast and pray for her. And she was saying, "Pray for me, fast for me." and my maidens and I will do the same, and we will see what God will do. In other words, she was determined to wait on the Lord and allow Him to guide her thoughts and to help her frame her words. Now, during this time, this 3-day period between the chapter 4, verse 17, and chapter 5, verse 1, that's a 3-day period that we don't hear anything about. Don't think for a moment that God is whiling away His time busy with other things. Now remember, He may be invisible, but He's at work. And that's the beauty of His invisibility. He can be moving in 1,000 places at the same time, working in this circumstance and in other circumstances that are beyond our control. And during a waiting period, God is not only working on our hearts, He's also working on the hearts of others. And all the while, He's giving added strength. Remember Isaiah's words about waiting? Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." Now from this verse we learn 4 things that happen while we wait. First, we gain new strength. We may feel weak, even intimidated, when we turn to our Lord. But while waiting, amazingly, we exchange our weakness for His strength. And second, we get a better perspective. It says we will mount up with wings as eagles. You know, eagles can spot a fish in a lake several miles away on a clear day. And by soaring like eagles while waiting, we gain perspective on what we're dealing with. And third, we store up energy. We shall run and not be weary. And notice His future tense. When we do encounter the things that we've been dreading, we will encounter it with a new strength. Extra energy will be ours to use. And fourth, we will deepen our determination to persevere. We shall walk and not faint. The Lord whispers reassurance to us. He puts steel in our bones, so to say. And we begin to feel increasingly more invincible. We gain new strength. We'll get a better perspective. We'll store up extra energy. We'll deepen our determination to persevere. And all that happens while we wait. And at the same time, during that period of waiting, nothing is happening. At least nothing visible. And you could easily tell yourself at a time like that, well, I'm waiting in vain. Nothing's going to change. But that's exactly what Satan wants you to think. Waiting is a waste. Don't you believe it? When the enemy's message roams into your mind, you need to kick it out. Reject it. Look at another verse in Isaiah, just a few verses after the eagle verse. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." And then verse 13 says, "For the Lord thy God will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, Fear not, I will help thee." And it's those kinds of thoughts that strengthen Esther while she's waiting and praying and fasting for those 3 days. And Mordecai did the same as Esther commanded. And now the roles are reversed. He was no longer in charge, she was. Or better still, the Lord was. And as the Lord gripped her heart, she became unafraid of what she faced. It was a silent yet powerful parenthesis in Esther's life. A 3-day parenthesis. Tonight, maybe you're facing adversity or doubt or a time of unease. Maybe it's time for you to pray and fast and to call upon a few close friends to fast and pray with you. Maybe it's time for you to say, I'm not going to rush into this unpredictable and unprecedented situation. I don't know my way through, and I can't find the path to walk. So I'm going to wait. In the meantime, I'm going to give it to God. I'm going to listen with a sensitive ear. I'm going to watch the Lord's leading with a sensitive eye. I'm reminded of the psalmist's words in Psalm 32, verses 6 and 7. For this shall every one that is godly pray unto thee in a time when thou mayest be found. Surely in the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him. Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Thou shalt compass me about with songs of deliverance. And then God answers in verse 8, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. God counsels us with His eye. You know, the eye makes no sound when it moves. And it requires a sensitive earthly eye to watch the movement of the eye of God, which is God's directions. And that's what's happening during these 3 days between chapter 4 and 5 in Esther's life. As she prepares for her finest hour, she must wait, pray, stay quiet, fast, and listen in her soul. Now, because of this interlude with God, Esther is able to approach the moment of truth, to step into the presence of the king calmly and confidently. Look at verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5 of Esther. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Proverbs 21:1 says this, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Listen, no king has ever or will ever intimidate God, no matter how wealthy or extensive his kingdom or how powerful his armies. Nebuchadnezzar found this out. Hold your place in Esther, but look over Daniel chapter number 4. Daniel chapter 4. Beginning in verse number 28. Verse 28, all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months he walked in the palace of the kingdom of his Babylon. And the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house and the kingdom of by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? Verse 31. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth to whomever soever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. Listen, God can handle anyone. Anyone. All right, He can handle your husband. He can handle your wife. He can handle your kids. He can handle your pastor. He can handle the person that gives you grief. He can handle your ex-mate, the person who's made all those promises and broke most of them. He can even handle your enemy. He can handle the most intimidating situations. Because in the hand of the Lord, any heart is like water. And Esther walks in that confidence. I mean, look at her. She doesn't cringe and cower. She stands. Esther stood in front of the king's court. The king saw Esther standing. She's not trembling. Though she's doing what's never been done before, she's standing tall, confident in the Lord. And when the king saw Esther standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight, and he extended his golden scepter to her. Now remember, without that gesture from the king, she would die. And now confident, she touches the top of the scepter, making a connection with the king. All right, back over in verse 3 of Esther 5. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given to thee to the half of the kingdom. Now, Esther doesn't know what to expect. And the king says, What's on your mind? What's troubling you? In fact, he goes so far as to say, What can I do for you? Name it. It sure is up to half of my kingdom. Now, this is her moment to bring down Haman. But she doesn't. Not now. See, this is a wise woman who understands the value of timing. She isn't in a hurry, nor is she revengeful. You know why? She's been waiting on the Lord. You know, we get in a hurry when we don't wait on the Lord. We jump ahead and we do rash things. We shoot from the hip. We run off our mouth. We say things that we later regret. But when we have sufficiently waited on the Lord, He gets full control of our spirit. And at such moments, we're like a glove, and His hand is moving us wherever He pleases. And Esther decided not to blurt out what she wanted. She used great restraint. She had a blank check from the king, but she didn't tell him what she desired. Instead, she decided to invite the king to a special banquet. She was going to put him in a position where he couldn't refuse her. So look at her response in verse 4. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Now, stop and think about this for a minute. Here she's been fasting for 3 days, and while she's fasting, she's preparing a banquet. You talk about enormous self-control, right? I mean, if you've ever dieted, you know what I'm talking about. There's no way I would have been tasting all that food that I'm preparing and saying, this is good stuff. No. She restrained and refrained. God was at work in the waiting, filling your thoughts with a plan. Give a banquet. Invite Haman. And here's what you need to say. And when you wait on the Lord, you don't have to sit in the corner contemplating, all right? You don't have to wear a robe and live in a hut in Tibet in the winter. Now, sometimes, of course, you need to sit down quietly by yourself along with the Lord for a time of quietness. Solitude and silence are great for nourishing our souls. But mostly you go right on with your business. You continue to do your regular activities. You just focus more fully on the Lord in the midst of it. You stay preoccupied with Him. You think His thoughts. You recall His words from the Bible that you've memorized. You feed your soul with His manna. But notice what Esther doesn't do. She doesn't point a finger at Haman. She doesn't rush ahead and tell the king what's troubling her. She doesn't play on his emotions and try to manipulate him by bursting into tears. She very calmly says, without frenzy or sobs, I've planned a banquet, and I'd love to have you and Haman attend. Now, Esther, of course, knew how much Ahasuerus loved banqueting. Remember at the beginning of the story? Months and months of it, banqueting. He loved high living. And she also knew that he valued Haman. So she played right into the king's interest. She put herself in the best possible situation to get her request granted. All right, look at verse 5. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now Ahasuerus orders rather than invites Haman to come. Now Haman is the prime minister, the favorite son, the recent holder of the signet ring. But when the queen offers a dinner, Haman has no say in it at all. He's ordered to come quickly to the palace and dine with Ahasuerus and Esther. And the king may rule the kingdom of Persia, and Haman may sign the edicts with his official king's seal, but it is the Lord who's in control of the entire situation. And in the nucleus of his divine plan, Esther becomes invincible. And Esther must have been sitting there thinking, isn't God great? I could have lost my head. Instead, here they are at this banquet that I prepared. The plan is working beautifully. What a surprise. And you know what? God is full of surprises. But it takes a sensitive spirit to see them, to be jolted by them. And you know what? Too many Christians are lulled. Too many Christians are lulled into lethargy. Oh, this is normal for me. I know the words in here, but by the time they get through they'll get all messed up. But you know what I mean, right? Lethargy. There we go. You know, sometimes people can sing all the words to a Christian song. They can recite the right Bible verses. They can quote this preacher or that teacher. But their Christian lives, down deep inside, are hollow. They're shallow. They're bored. Are you in that condition tonight? When that happens, you become calloused and insensitive. And you're in for a life of boredom and mediocrity. And how tragic for that to happen. Remember what Jesus said, I came to give you life, and that more boringly, mediocrely, lethargically. Got it out? No. More abundantly. More abundantly. How tragic. How tragic so many Christians' lives are. See, the walk of faith is designed to be a walk of adventure, filled with times of delightful surprises. And some Christians become like the people who once greeted President Theodore Roosevelt at a gala ball. All of them said the same thing, smiled the same tired smile, repeating the right greetings by rote, talking with their mouths, not with their heads or their hearts. And tired of shaking hands and smiling his big smile and responding with the usual inanities used at such occasions, Roosevelt did something absolutely outrageous. Convinced no one was listening anyway, he began to greet the rest of his guests by saying this with a smile. I murdered my grandmother this morning. And everyone smiled blankly. And they said things like, wonderful, lovely, keep up the good work. And one diplomat was listening, however, and he leaned over and whispered in Roosevelt's ear, I'm sure she had it coming to her. You know, empty Christian talk drives me up a wall when it's filled with cliches. I've used cliches before, but I don't use them anymore. Tired old cliches. You know, the same old rote things that you say every time to every situation. No. Don't make nonsensical small talk, because it's just not right. See, the more it goes on in our lives, the more real Christian life is losing its zip. And with Esther, her walk with God was an exciting adventure. She stepped into the king's presence because she had confidence in God. Esther planned a banquet because she trusted God to do the unexpected. And let me ask you this, are you still open to the unexpected? Are you really waiting on the Lord to do His will? You may be married and having serious trouble with your mate. And so you wait on the Lord to take care of him or to take care of her. But during that waiting period, the Lord says, surprise, we have to take care of you. You're the greater part of the problem than your mate. Or maybe you're feeling finally settled, happy in your job, and somewhat financially secure. But soon God may be saying to you, surprise, I'm going to move you out of this job and away from this location. Are you willing to shift agendas for God to have his way? I mean, who would have guessed God's plan for Esther? But yet here she was at a banquet with the king and Haman. And by the way, she still hasn't told the king what's troubling her. But surely he knows something is wrong. See, she would have never risked coming into his presence as she did unless she had a very good reason. So as they're sitting there together at the feast, he raises the matter again. Verse 6. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be performed. Now Esther played on the king's curiosity. He wanted to know what she wanted, and she told him, not yet. Why don't you come to dinner with me? And he asked her again at the banquet. Again, he offered her up to half his kingdom. But the irony is that the thing that she wanted was the removal of the man who was eating with them. Verse 7. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is. She began her statement. My petition and my request is. Now, it may be at this time that she was going to make her request. Blow the whistle on Haman. But if you notice that, it's almost like the statement is interrupted. And maybe the whisper of God came into her heart to stop her. Maybe she looked at the king's face and realized this wasn't the right time. So she stopped. And then verse 8. If I have found favor in thy sight, in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Okay, tomorrow I'll tell you what my request is. Now, Esther could have done everything today that she's going to do tomorrow, but she's trusting God's timing to do it the right way in the right time. So she says, there's something I want to say to you, but I'll wait till tomorrow. And for some reason, as we'll see later, God's timing requires one more day. Now, meanwhile, Haman is on cloud 9. Look at verses 9 and 10. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Now he walks out of the palace thinking, boy, oh boy, am I something. I've just had a private dinner with the audience of the king and the queen. What an honor. So he walks out of that palace full of pride, with an ego that can't be contained. And who does he run into? Mordecai, the Jew that will not respect him. Now Mordecai's on top of everything, okay? He's in the exact place where he should be and is part of God's plan. Now remember, the last time we saw him, he couldn't go into the king's gate because he was wearing sackcloth and ashes. But now here he is in the king's gate. Now obviously he's changed his clothes. He senses God's at work. He knows that something great is about to happen. Also, despite Haman's official status and power, despite his evil decree, Mordecai is still not intimidated by Haman. All right, he knows his God is greater than Haman. So when Haman walks out of the palace, Mordecai doesn't look at all that impressed. Mordecai was insignificant in the overall scheme of things, considering Haman's great moment, But Mordecai wouldn't stand up and bow before Haman, and it drove Haman crazy. Now, someone has said that you can tell the character of a person by what irritates them. Little people are irritated by little things. Big people aren't irritated except by big things. Big people don't get irritated except by big things. And Haman was a little person. This insignificant incident of a righteous Jew not bowing down to him infuriated him. So he went home and he tried to impress his friends and his family because his self-esteem was hurt. Verse 11. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Oh yeah, a typical blowhard. Yada, 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 yada. Brag, brag, brag. Me, me, me. And can you imagine having to sit and listen to this blowhard? Now, of course, nobody wanted to offend him. I mean, after all, he's in big time with the king. He has his signet. But you know that they have to be sitting there, rolling their eyes and wondering how long before we can get out of here. And he tells them what he's worth. And then he begins bragging about how many sons he has. One Jewish Targum says this, that Haman had 208 other sons in addition to 10 of his own. Whew. And then he recounts instance after instance where he's been promoted and exalted. Arrogance and conceit to the max. Now, interesting point though, with all this glory and wealth and power that Haman has, you'd think he'd be satisfied. But he wasn't. People like that are never satisfied. And what he's not satisfied about at the moment is the fact that Mordecai, one man, one Jew, won't respect him. And a person like this wants everybody to bow to him. And if one doesn't, this becomes the sole worry and focus. Verses 12 and 13. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow I'm invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Well, finally his wife says in effect, so why don't you do something about it? I'm sick and tired of hearing you complain about this guy Mordecai. Verse 14. Then said Zeresh his wife and all of his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. So Haman loves the idea. He orders the gallows to be built 50 cubits high. That's 75 feet. That's 7.5 stories. I'd call that overreacting, wouldn't you? And we've also seen that the word gallows doesn't mean what we think it means. All right, we think of the Western hang 'em high type movie. But the word really means tree or literally pole or stake. And in Persia, they didn't hang their victims with a rope, they impaled them. A stake was thrust into their body, and then the body was hung on a pole, in this case 7.5 stories high. The height of the tree was to enable the people in the city to see the victim. And the Romans got the idea of crucifixion from the Phoenicians, who earlier learned it from the Persians. And that's why Jesus was said to have hung on a tree or a pole. And the Romans developed the practice of driving nails into the hands and feet, but the Persians simply impaled the body on a pole. And it was an anguishing, humiliating, torturous death. So Haman's hatred consumed him to the point where only the agonizing death of his enemy would satisfy him. And he went to sleep that night listening to the sound of this construction crew building the pole upon which his enemy would hang. Now, we're in the midst of a suspenseful plot, which leads to an amazing turn of events that we'll see next week. But this is a good place to pause and consider how these things tie in with our lives today. Now, first, when preparing for an unprecedented event, wait on the Lord before getting involved. These are principles for dealing with difficult situations. When preparing for an unprecedented event, wait on the Lord before getting involved. At least as important as the thing that we're waiting on God for is for what God does to us while we wait. He works on our patience. He works on the circumstances. He works on others. And if we plunge in, we'll run ahead, we'll mess up, and we'll mess up His better arrangements and plan. And if you're on a verge of a big decision, wait. All right, the bigger the decision, the longer the wait. Don't get in a hurry, especially if it's unprecedented. Now, if you're walking a road that you've never walked before and there's no map, then you better wait. How long? Well, I have no idea. It could be 3 days, could be 3 weeks, could be 3 months. And during the waiting period, don't try to take things into your own hands. Restrain the tendency to move things along. And second, when dealing with an unpredictable person, count on the Lord to open doors and hearts. Let me personalize the proverb. When your ways please the Lord, He makes even your enemies be at peace with you. All right, that's Proverbs 16:7. Count on the Lord to do that. And amazing things happen to our courage while we're waiting. Rather than getting more fearful, we become less fearful. Rather than losing heart, we gain confidence. The Lord becomes more important. His presence overshadows the threatening, even intimidating circumstances that would otherwise immobilize us or paralyze our thoughts. And then third, when working through an unpleasant situation, trust the Lord for enduring patience. Think of the patience of Esther that she must have had to refrain from telling the king about Haman when she had him in the very palm of her hand. Haman, the man who hated her people so much that he was going to have them wiped from the face of the earth. And think of the patience she had to wait for just the right time. In situations that are unpleasant, timing is as important as actions, sometimes more so. So pace yourself. Have patience. Wait for the situation to become bearable and workable. And then finally, when standing against an unprincipled enemy, ask the Lord for invincible courage. And I believe that's what happened to Esther in the midst of the first banquet. She sensed a growing invincibility and courage, even in the presence of her mortal enemy, as she waited on the Lord's timing. So ask the Lord for that kind of invincible courage, and He'll grant your request. He'll give you the courage to stand. And remember what I asked at the beginning of the sermon tonight? Will you take a stand for what is right, even if it costs you? Will you determine to do what God wants you to do in such a time as this? And if you will, God will strengthen and equip you. Let's pray.